Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about the ban announcements, which a lot of it we saw coming, but we just see some massive shakeups in Legacy and Pauper. I'm going to tell you what Wizards of the Coast said about each of these ban decisions and give my 2 cents about it. So first off, in Standard, no changes. Standard is flourishing, and there are no changes to the format with this announcement. Our approach to Standard banned and restricted updates remain unchanged. We are committed to leaving the format as untouched as possible from one rotation to the next, banning cards only if something truly problematic to the health of the format emerges. Once a year right before rotation, we'll consider more nuanced changes with the goal of making the format as fun and dynamic as possible for the duration of the next rotation cycle. We aren't to that once a year moment yet, and both Tarkir Dragonstorm and Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy will have a chance to make their mark on Standard before the format rotates with Edge of Eternities. Standard was on display at Pro Tour Aether Drift, which showcased a rich and diverse metagame. The big 3 of Standard have been clearly defined, with Gruul Mice, Esper Pixie, and Domain Overlords being the most popular strategies. Despite this definition at the top of the metagame, those 3 decks represented only half of the field, and the other half was wide open. There's a chance for success with almost any style of deck imaginable right now in Standard, which is very cool to see. Domain Overlords ended up taking down the Pro Tour and looked dominant all weekend, but since then, it's seen its win rate slowly decline as the metagame adjusts. One of the most exciting aspects of Standard this format is the degree to which it continues to evolve, even between set releases. The Self-Bound Synergy deck, featuring Nurturing Pixie and/or This Town Ain't Big Enough, are a well-known pillar of Standard now, but weren't popular till over a month after the release of Magic the Gathering Foundations, despite the fact that the shell of the deck existed in the format ever since the release of Duskmourn House of Horror. With Tarkir Dragonstorm and Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy on the horizon, it's going to be fascinating to watch the journey of the Standard format. I'm very excited to see what players do with these cards and what new decks and strategies emerge. I 100% agree. Standard's incredibly healthy. You can play almost any deck and win the tournament. There's no reason to throw out bannings when they're not needed. Next up is Pioneer. No changes again. They said, "We have continued to keep a close eye on Pioneer since our last banned and restricted announcement, and have been happy with both deck diversity and the representation of different macro archetypes in the format. There's been a healthy amount of churn in the Pioneer metagame over the last several months, with cards from the last year continuing to make a splash across several archetypes. Emberheart Challenger, Manifold Mouse, and Heartfire Hero have been a central part of aggressive decks, mirroring the Standard Mice package. Fear of Missing Out and Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber have been seen play in Rakdos midrange shells, changing the way the deck is played and giving it a lot more closing power. Yigra Eater of All and Scavenger's Talent have created a more combo-centric version of Jund Sacrifice, leaving players with a strong creature combo deck they can play after the Amalia banning. The Overlord cycle out of Duskmourn House of Horror have reshaped Enigmatic Incarnation as an archetype, letting it become the primary go-big deck of the format. We've also seen several smaller changes to decks, with cards like Artist Talent and Is It Phoenix, and Valor's Flagship and Greasefang decks, providing a little more consistency and strength to existing decks. Despite the churn, the Pioneer metagame has remained well-balanced, with a large variety of playstyles viable and no deck or archetype having a problematic win rate or play rate. The metagame continues to evolve as new decks like Dimir Bounce make their way into the format. We will continue to monitor the metagame as it develops, but at this time, we're happy with the state of Pioneer and have no changes to the format. I very much disagree with this announcement. If you look at any of the stats and metagame, like I do the metagames on this channel, red, black, midrange, and the red-based aggro deck, specifically mono red, not Gruul, have just taken over the format. It's like unplayable if you don't play one of those 2 decks, and that sucks. I disagree. I mean, this also could be an example of just grinders on Magic Online dictating the format, and they want to pick the consistent decks, and those decks are the consistent ones, and isn't necessarily the most powerful decks, because there are no like relevant Pioneer tournaments besides online, but it's frustrating to read this. Next up is Modern, and we saw this one coming. Underworld Breach is banned. To echo a point from the opening of the article, December's update to the Modern banned list did a lot to breathe new life into the format. We've seen Mox Opal, Green Sun Zenith, and Faithless Looting show up in a bunch of decks to varying degrees of satisfaction from the team here at Wizards. Green Sun Zenith showing up in Yawgmoth and Amulet Titan combo decks was something we anticipated and were happy with. Faithless Looting breathing new life into proactive graveyard-centric decks like Hollow One is also great. However, Mox Opal teaming up with Underworld Breach to create an explosive and resilient combo is not something we're happy with. To give a bit more context, the last couple of months have seen a ton of experimentation with different ways to play with new tools in the format, but over time it has become increasingly apparent that the strongest thing to do in Modern is play a Temur Grinding Breach combo deck. The deck uses a combination of Underworld Breach and Grinding Station in conjunction with a 0 mana artifact to mill its library 3 cards at a time before winning with a card like Thassa's Oracle or Grapeshot. The deck is notoriously resilient to graveyard and artifact hate by virtue of its ability to diversify its threats, which make it uniquely difficult to overcome in sideboarding. Between that resiliency and its explosiveness, with it being able to win as early as the first turn, we're confident it's time to send Breach back to the Underworld. With the amount of pressure that Underworld Breach put on the format, we expect the format to change a good bit with its departure, especially sideboards. Previously, we saw players committing well over half of their sideboards to try to suppress the combo, but now we're optimistic that the format can open up a bit and allow for a wider range of strategies to exist. Looking past Temur Grinding Breach, Modern looks pretty good. A bunch of different decks are showing up, with Orzhov Blink making a name for itself over the last few weeks. Aether Drift has made a major impact to the format, with Ketramos the New Dawn making its way into the aforementioned Blink decks. Marauding Mako showed up in Hollow One decks, and Stock Up showing up in blue decks that are looking to play a longer game. We're planning to keep an eye on the decks that were strong enough to hang despite Temur Grinding Breach's prevalence, Boros Energy decks and Dimir Oculus decks, as well as Eldrazi variants, Amulet Titan, and the Orzhov Blink deck. We're watching Red-White Energy variants the closest to see if reasonable counterplay emerges in the coming regional championship qualifier season, and we're excited to see what players cook up. Yeah, I mean, we saw this coming, right? I'm glad they banned Underworld Breach and let Mox Opal breathe. I was really afraid of them just banning Mox Opal again and just like moving on and leaving Underworld Breach as like a deck. Because I like Mox Opal. I think it's a really cool card if we can have it not enabling combos, which might be hard in the future, but we'll see. By the numbers, the Legacy of today does a good job of emulating a balanced format. The most played deck, Dimir Reanimator, isn't taking too large of a piece of the pie, and the next handful of decks consistently showing up aren't doing so at clips that are widely out of bounds. The issue is that despite having several different decks, the format's slower macro archetypes, like midrange and control, have largely been pushed out of the metagame as environmental pressures have widely condensed the games. Further, player sentiment and event attendance has trended downward. It's apparent to us that people who love to play Legacy do not love to play today's Legacy, so we're taking a couple steps to try and improve the format. Troll of Khazad-dum has been a big part of Legacy for almost 2 years now, with some form of Dimir Reanimator being the strongest deck in the format since approximately the release of Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. Has an extremely unique impact on deck building, allowing players to fill their deck with cards like Reanimate and Animate Dead without having to play a bunch of big creatures that might otherwise be dead cards in their hand, or playing as many discard cards as possible to get big creatures into their graveyard. This subversion of opportunity cost has meant Reanimator has been exceptional at playing a fair game while threatening an intensely unfair game for the better part of 2 years now. We believe the Reanimator strategy is a core part of what makes Legacy feel like Legacy, and is fun to have in the format. We've learned that the deck is more fun and less frustrating to play against when it must be a more committal synergy deck that isn't afforded the luxury of straddling the line between a tempo-y aggro deck and a combo deck. For that reason, Troll of Khazad-dum is banned. I think I agree. You know, feeling wrong to play a tempo deck that doesn't have a reanimation strategy felt bad. And it feeling wrong to play an all-in reanimation strategy because you can just play a mid-range deck with all of the good stuff in Reanimator. It's really, really bad. Hopefully this means that like other tempo-y decks will pop up and like less powerful decks can now compete with those untempo-y decks. But we had another banning in Sowing Mycospawn. This is what they said. On the other side of the format, speed, Eldrazi and other colorless strategies have been prevalent in Legacy since they got a boost from Modern Horizons 3 last summer. Generally speaking, these decks have presented the issue of completely sidestepping the rules of engagement in the format, making them extremely hard to interact with. Last December, the strongest version of the strategy was using Vexing Boggle as insulation against cheap spell interaction for a fast combo. But now, colorless strategies have positioned themselves to have the best inevitability in the format, with a good chunk of that inevitability coming from a single card. Sowing Mycospawn does it all in the context of colorless Eldrazi. It can grab late-game cards like Eye of Ugin and some interactive lands like Blast Zone or Karakas. But most frequently, it's grabbing copies of Wasteland to exacerbate the strength of its land exiling effect. That land exiling effect can notably target basic lands, which is a class of card that is more fun when it's reliable out to other land-hating cards in the format, like Wasteland and Blood Moon. Sowing Mycospawn is so good at attacking lands, often 2 at a time, and even hitting basic lands, is cause environmental pressures on the format, compressing games to the first handful of turns and putting the Magic play experience at risk. For these environmental reasons, as well as violation of format heuristics, Sowing Mycospawn is banned. In the coming weeks, we'll be keeping an eye on the prevalence and win rates of the various all-in combo and fast mana decks that bubble to the surface of Legacy. Blood Moon Stompy and Oops All Spells are prime examples of decks that have seen their meta share rise in the past few months with the density of modal double-face land cards in Modern Horizons 3. Both currently with bounds of play rates and win rates that have been historically acceptable. Ideally, the above changes will create space for more counterplay against these decks over time. I agree with the Sowing Mycospawn. I really enjoyed playing Sowing Mycospawn, but it does lead to way too many just totally non-games, especially since it's difficult to counter the effects of Sowing Mycospawn. Even if you counter Sowing Mycospawn with like Force of Will, which is supposed to insulate you from those like threats like that in Legacy, Sowing Mycospawn would just kill the land, grab a wasteland, kill another land, and then we're done. Because Legacies can be very much be a 2 or 3 land format. And yeah, I think this ban is good. It's too bad it's likely going to kill the Eldrazi deck, because the Eldrazi deck is really cool and fun to play. But I definitely think it's needed to have more actual games in the format. Next up, no changes in Vintage. There are no changes in Vintage with this announcement, but there is much discussion about one card and its place in Vintage. That card is Lurrus of the Dream Den. Last August, we restricted Urza Saga for a few reasons, one of which was the hope that it would reduce Lurrus's prevalence in the format by weakening decks looking to utilize a toolbox of cheap artifacts. While Lurrus Saga decks are essentially gone, and the diversity of Lurrus decks has increased, the metagame share of the card Lurrus of the Dream Den has also increased over time. Lurrus was banned before for 9 months in 2020-2021 under the original companion rule. It was the only power level ban that Vintage had seen in many decades, but felt necessary at the time. Once the companion rule was updated, we unbanned Lurrus, in the Vintage spirit of keeping as many cards as possible legal. At the time, we said it was an experiment, and one we'd be willing to revert if necessary. We had the discussion about whether this was still true. The short answer is yes. If Lurrus becomes a significant enough metagame problem, we will ban it. At the moment, however, we are not close to that threshold. That threshold is, of course, fuzzy. But we'd like to see a much staler metagame concentrated around just a few Lurrus builds and a higher metagame share for Lurrus. There are cards banned in Vintage, dexterity cards, subgame cards, sticker and attraction cards, and so on. They are banned in all formats for permanent logistics issues. While the companion mechanic is not much of a logistical issue, it has a unique interaction with Vintage and restricted lists. Because of this, banning in Vintage is on the table for a card with a companion mechanic. We won't let the format stagnate to preserve the clarity of a rule that already has expectations. So we'll continue to keep an eye on things with Lurrus, both in tournaments and with player sentiment. Overall, the Vintage metagame looks healthy based on recent results we've seen. The continuing presence of Lurrus doesn't seem to be stifling overall deck diversity and innovation. I agree with this. I don't think Lurrus needs to be banned. I am sick of playing against Lurrus and playing Lurrus myself in Vintage on Magic Online, but I don't feel wrong for playing a deck that doesn't have Lurrus in it, which means it's probably fine to leave. Arena-only formats, starting with Alchemy. Rebalances play an important role in this format as we dial in cards for more frequent changes. Our last round of rebalances changes looked very successful at pulling the life gain and heist decks within bounds of the format. Golden Sidekick is playing a more supporting role in the life gain deck, and Impetuous Lootmonger no longer the payoff for playing your opponent's cards that it once was. Selesnya Rabbits remains a powerful option for players, even with the additional mana cost added to Buxton Decorated Host. New cards from Alchemy Aether Drift are also making an impact in the format. Nectamin Shines Again has been a powerful addition to cheap creature decks, while Trackhand Trainer and Ornate Imitations added a splashy new Simic Exhaust archetype to the metagame. We are watching the Grixis Chorus deck, which is showing an impressive win rate since we rebalanced Hymn to the Ages and Ribald Shanty, that may make further changes to the format. We expect to continue to leverage rebalances to keep the metagame fresh and balanced. Expect other updates during Alchemy Tarkir's release. We are excited about the variety and competitiveness in Alchemy right now and feel its time is right to run in the regional championship qualifier weekend with the format this coming May. Yeah, Alchemy has felt fine. I only really play Alchemy a little bit on the ladder here and there when I need a palate cleanser, but it's been fine. As far as Explorer, there are no changes since the release of Pioneer Master. The difference between Explorer and Pioneer has become tiny. We're continuing to monitor the Pioneer competitive metagame for cards not in MTG Arena. Out of 411 distinct competitive Magic Online deck lists played in March, only the following cards were missing. Innis Kazul's Toll Collector, Warping Whale, Battle of the Bridge, Triton Shore Stalker, Nissa's Defeat, Encroaching Wastes, and Rose. We're exploring new ways to add competitive Pioneer cards like these to MTG Arena. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's barely an announcement. In Historic, no changes. Historic continues to be our most diverse format in MTG Arena with no deck above 5% in the overall play rate. The format has stayed mostly the same since our last update. One notable change is the rise of powerful Boros Enchantments deck, featuring many Duskmourn House of Horror cards like Shelter by Ghosts and Shard Mage's Rescue. This deck is now competing with other powerful archetypes like Energy Aggro, Is It Wizards, 5-color Omniscience, and monocolored decks like Elves and Goblins. We are continuing to monitor the strength and speed of the Energy Aggro deck. We've rebalanced a few cards already and will continue to do so if this powerful deck starts to take up too much of the format. Yeah, when I played the Historic Qualifier weekend recently, it felt like a really healthy format, so like it's totally fine. In Timeless, there are no changes. The largest addition to Timeless has been Chrome Mox, adding a fast mana ramp option at the cost of a card in your hand. The card saw a lot of play when it was released with Aether Drift, but has since been on the decline as not all decks benefit from the effect. Chrome Mox and Brightgas Gearhulk have helped push a Birthing Ritual deck. They become one of the top performing options in the format. Early data suggests that this archetype is holding its own against Show and Tell, Charbelcher, and Energy Aggro. It'd be exciting to see if it can maintain the performance as counter players are established in MTG Arena's strongest format, rather. Yeah, there are multiple decks. It's fun to play. We love it. And then Brawl. Brawl continues to grow in MTG Arena with more players engage with the unique 100-card singleton format. With each new Alchemy release, we have seen a good uptake of new commanders, giving players more options to build around. Currently, 85% of all Brawl matches give both players a close to 50% chance to win based on their commander choice. We'll continue to monitor and adjust matchmaking with each release to best match similar decks and commanders together for fun and engaging games of Magic. Yeah, it feels like I can play almost anything. But let's look at Pauper. Pauper has some big changes. Basking Broodscale is banned. Kuldotha Rebirth is banned. Deadly Dispute is banned, which attacks 3 of the top 5 decks. And then Prophetic Prism is unbanned and High Tide is unbanned. I love these bannings because these decks are oppressive and need to be neutered a little bit. Unfortunately, the Basking Broodscale ban totally kills an archetype, but the Deadly Dispute Kuldotha Rebirth going away is kind of nice. Just makes these decks that will exist anyway just a little less powerful. Prophetic Prism being unbanned, High Tide being unbanned, especially High Tide, is kind of wild. So let's see what they have to say. Overall, the format is varied. There are a ton of decks you can play, with many of them hovering between 48 and 53% win rates. The win rate gaps in all the formats are small, and there's a ton of ability to play what you want and innovate. However, there's more than just numbers. While things can be balanced, that doesn't mean that the play patterns are the most fun, or the same packages aren't showing up across tons of decks and making things feel homogenous, or that polarity of certain matchups is ideal. To do this, we looked at a lot of Magic Online data, and you'll see us reference some win percentages below. Tabletop tournament results and conduction of our own testing. While no one tournament or event makes or breaks our decision-making process, we look across them all in aggregate. I'll also mention that we finalized these decisions before the recent Pauper-geddon event, though we saw nothing from that event that caused us to change course on any decisions. Today's changes are meant to address these issues and in general slow the format down slightly while addressing some play pattern notes. Our hope is this will bring some old decks back, remove a frustrating combo deck, and create a whole new archetype. Which I think these changes absolutely do. Again, it's kind of too bad Basking Broodscale ban kills an archetype. I'm excited to see High Tide. I'm very worried. That card's good. Seeing a mono blue Storm deck or something like that. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.